The Hikurangi subduction zone is currently being studied by scientists worldwide, and the risk it poses to Aotearoa New Zealand is thought to be greater than previously understood. Here's what scientists are saying.
The Hikurangi subduction zone is one of the major plate boundaries in New Zealand, and it's mostly focused in the North Island, and it's where the Pacific plate is basically diving down westward beneath the eastern part of the North Island. So given the dimensions of the Hikurangi subduction zone, we think that it can produce at least magnitude 8 earthquakes, possibly even larger, more like magnitude 9 earthquakes, similar to what was observed in northern Japan in 2011. If this earthquake on the Hikurangi subduction zone were to involve significant movement on the offshore part of the plate boundary, offshore the east coast of the North Island, this could cause large displacement of the seafloor and generation of a tsunami as well. So very unfortunately, we simply don't know when the next earthquake and tsunami is going to occur on the Hikurangi subduction zone. We know from the geological record that they've occurred in the past several times over the last 10,000 years or so. And we know from the historic record, for example, the 1947 earthquakes in Gisborne, that they also have occurred more recently. So the two earthquakes that caused a tsunami near Gisborne in 1947, these earthquakes occurred on the Hikurangi subduction zone. However, the impacts of those tsunami, even though they were up to several meters or more in that region, were actually very low. And that's because at that time in the 1940s, that part of the coastline was not very densely populated. However, if this were to happen today, there's a lot more people living there now, and that would be of much greater concern and cause a lot more damage and also potentially kill more people if such a tsunami were to happen again.
We here in GNS, spent a long time looking at old aerial photographs, and if you compare aerial photographs of the New Zealand coast from the 1940s, which is the earliest set we have, to today, the difference is enormous. Both in terms of where people live, but the infrastructure, airports, roads, railway, industry, ports. The increase in exposure, what we call the exposure to the natural hazards, is increased enormously on the coast. So when you play that the events, the earthquakes and the tsunami are probably not changing in size, the impact of those events into the future is just going to be, many-fold larger than what they've ever been in the past. The most likely scenario for earthquake and associated tsunami is a more regional event than the worst case. I mean, earthquakes in general, the smaller events are more frequent than the largest events. So while we need to plan and manage for the largest event, the more likely event is something that's more regional. The very widespread impacts can occur if we have a very large earthquake, and it gets more complicated if there's a sizable tsunami as well. That has impacts then into the infrastructure, so we lose road, rail, electricity, all our water networks, as we've seen recently, and that can cause a lot of disruption to business. Our understanding of impacts into infrastructure, or what keeps our communities ticking over, we've learned lots of lessons out of Christchurch, obviously, with the liquefaction and what the damage to the water network and the road network. So we can extend those lessons to other parts of the country and be forewarned in some sense by knowing what could happen. And actually in a project here in Wellington, we've modelled likely outages of the different infrastructures, different lifelines. Then you can look at, well, how to invest now in hardening those systems so that they have less impact when the event inevitably happens. I think the role that business and organisations and where people work have as elements of a civil defence system, if you like, it should not be overlooked as well. I mean, people need to go to work. The businesses provide lots of services for the populace. Good planning. So again, it's continuity planning for businesses. It's thinking outside the square. It's thinking about what if. Many commentators around the world would think that New Zealand's doing pretty well, but we know we can do even better, and that translates into less lives lost, into speedier recovery.
It's really important to undertake planning to assist with building resilience to natural hazards, because if you have a plan, you've worked out what you're going to do during an event and how you're going to respond and how you're going to recover afterwards. So pre-planning is essential for organisations and communities to ensure that they're prepared adequately for a disaster like that. By practicing drills and participating in exercises, one of the key things that happens is it builds your skills and your abilities to actually undertake that exercise or to respond in a real event. And it also builds your confidence in your ability to do it as well, which is a really important part in the reason why people want to prepare and want to actually respond appropriately in an event. We've found that people who drop, cover and hold during the ShakeOut drill, for example, are more likely to drop, cover and hold in an actual earthquake. So we do have proof that taking part in some of these exercises does actually promote the right action during an actual earthquake. People should really practice drop, cover and hold for an earthquake, followed by tsunami hīkoi evacuation, because it's really by undertaking these practices that you start to learn in your mind and your body about what you need to do when an actual event occurs, and you don't have to think about it too much at the time. Building resilience to natural hazards such as earthquake and tsunami can happen at lots of different levels, and it needs to happen at lots of different levels. So you need your built environment to be safe, your engineered environment to be safe, your buildings to be safe, so that people aren't injured when an actual event occurs. You need to build up people's capacities so that they have the skills to be able to respond and the skills to be able to prepare. And you also need to build up the social environment in which they live in.
We don't need to be afraid or fatalist about these big events as though we can't do anything about them. The most important thing is conversations in the community, but also conversations between central and local government and with business and between science and engineering and policy. All of those things are here for the taking, and that would make a huge difference to improved resilience in New Zealand.